Fort Benning was a place where sweat stained uniforms before dawn and where voices of drill sergeants could shatter the quiet like thunder. Every morning, the base came alive with the stomp of boots on gravel, the metallic clang of weapons, and the sharp smell of dust and oil. Young recruits most barely out of high school dragged themselves into formation, their eyes heavy, yet their backs rigid with determination. Here, weakness was mocked, and strength was worshipped. Among the rows of recruits, the rumbling trucks, and the barking commands, there moved a figure that seemed out of place. Marjorie. She wasn't dressed in fatigues or boots. Instead, she wore a plain polo shirt, tucked into faded khaki pants, her silver hair tucked beneath an old cap. She pushed a cart of cleaning supplies, its wheels squeaking rhythmically as it rolled across the concrete. In one hand she carried a mop, in the other, a small trash bag. Moving with quiet precision through spaces, everyone else filled with chaos. To the recruits, she was invisible. Or worse, she was a target for their jokes. "Careful," one muttered loudly as she passed. "The mess hall. Grandma might mop us into formation." His buddy chuckled. Nah, she'd probably trip over the mop before that. The laughter spread, sharp and youthful, the kind of laughter soldiers used to mask exhaustion. Marjorie didn't flinch. She gave the faintest smile, as though she hadn't even heard, and continued swabbing the floor. The mop moved steadily, her posture straight, her pace unhurried. But behind her calm, her eyes flicked up briefly, studying them. She noticed things others didn't. How one recruit favored his left ankle, how another's rifle strap was frayed at the edge. She saw everything. And though they didn't know it, she had once been trained to. Yet none of that mattered here. To them, she was just the cleaning lady. By late morning, the Georgia sun scorched the training fields, baking the earth until heat shimmered in waves. Recruits ran obstacle courses, while drill sergeants bellowed. The air was filled with grunts, curses, and the sound of bodies hitting the ground. Dust clung to sweat-slick faces, and every muscle ached from endless repetitions. Marjorie moved silently along the edges of the field, emptying bins and sweeping debris. A group of recruits lounged during a short break, and as she passed, one elbowed his friend. "Hey, bet she couldn't carry my rucksack 10 feet, he said. Another recruit laughed. "She couldn't even lift it off the ground." "She probably lifts feather dusters at home for exercise," the third added, drawing louder laughter. The comments carried across the field. Marjorie heard every word. Her grip on the mop tightened, just slightly, before she relaxed again. She had no interest in correcting them, no need to prove herself. She had learned long ago that silence could be louder than any retort. But still, a flicker crossed her face, gone as quickly as it came. Later that evening, the barracks smelled of sweat and detergent. Recruits sprawled on bunks, exhausted from drills. The harsh fluorescent lights overhead buzzed faintly as Marjorie wheeled in her cart. Her presence was met with groans. "Ooh, here comes the bleach smell. She's like a ghost. Shows up everywhere. Bet she cleans slower then." We run. More laughter. But others stayed quiet, too tired to bother. Some even watched curiously as she worked. She moved methodically, wiping down surfaces, gathering trash, scrubbing with strong, sure strokes. There was no hesitation in her movements. Every corner she touched gleamed when she was done. One recruit, sitting on his bunk, finally asked, "Why do you even work here? Don't they need people your age at home?" Marjorie paused, then turned her head slightly, giving him a faint smile. "Someone has to keep this place clean," she said simply, her voice calm, almost melodic. Then she went back to scrubbing, offering no more explanation. It was an answer, but not really. And it gnawed at the recruit longer than he expected. Despite their mocking, something about her unsettled the soldiers. She never seemed rushed, never flustered, never angry, even when insulted to her face. She carried herself with a quiet dignity that clashed with the rough, loud energy of the base. At times, it felt like she knew something they didn't, single quotes T. Drill Sergeant Matthews noticed it too. He wasn't one to spare words for civilians, but he caught himself watching her once as she maneuvered a heavy trash bin outside. She lifted it with practiced efficiency, movements oddly deliberate, like a soldier executing a drill. For a moment, his instincts pricked. There was something familiar about her, something disciplined. But then the moment passed. He shook his head and barked orders at the recruits again. Nights at Fort Benning carried their own rhythm. After lights out, recruits whispered stories, swapping rumors about the cleaning lady. Some claimed she had once been a bodybuilder, pointing to the way she carried buckets without straying. Others insisted she was just a frail woman clinging to a paycheck. One even joked that she lived in the supply closet and came out only to clean. But every rumor carried a trace of curiosity. She had become a mystery they laughed at, but couldn't quite ignore. For Marjorie, the barracks were a reminder of a different life. As she pushed her cart through the halls, echoes of cadence calls stirred something deep within her chest. Once, long ago, she had been the one running in formation, boots pounding the earth, lungs burning with effort. She remembered the sting of sweat, the weight of a rucksack, the cold steel of a rifle. Those days had shaped her, but they had also taken much. Injuries, loss, and memories, too heavy to carry into old age. She had traded combat boots for sneakers, weapons for mops. But the instincts never left. Discipline, strength, and awareness lived in her still, quiet beneath the surface. And though the recruits didn't know it, the woman they mocked was forged in fire far harsher than anything they were enduring. One night, as she finished her rounds, a recruit dropped his water bottle, and it rolled beneath a bunk. He reached lazily, failing to grab it. Without a word, Marjorie stooped, lifted the edge of the heavy bunk frame with one hand, and slid the bottle out with the other. The recruit's eyes widened. Thanks, he muttered. Marjorie just smiled, set the bunk back down, and walked away. The incident spread quickly among the others. By morning, the whispers grew. She lifted the whole bunk, man. Like it was nothing. Some dismissed it as exaggeration, but others weren't so sure anymore. Still, the mocking continued, though thinner now, tinged with unease. They didn't realize how close they were to discovering the truth, that their cleaning lady was no ordinary woman, and that soon, circumstances would force her to reveal strength none of them could match. For now, she remained in the background, a silent shadow moving through the chaos of Fort Benning. She swept floors, emptied bins, and endured. Laughter. To most, she was invisible. But every day, fate moved her closer to the moment that would shatter their assumptions forever. And when that day arrived, the soldiers who mocked her would never see her the same way again. The Georgia sun was merciless that afternoon, hanging like a blazing torch over the dusty training fields of Fort Benning. Heat radiated off the ground, turning every metal surface into a branding iron. Sweat poured from recruits as they endured the drill sergeant's relentless commands. The air carried the thick smell of oil, dust, and fuel, while the constant roar of diesel engines drowned out even the sharpest orders. It was convoy training day. A line of Humvees thundered across the practice grounds, their heavy tires crushing dirt into powder. To the recruits, these vehicles were both awe-inspiring and intimidating symbols of military power that weighed more than 10 men could hope. To move. Marjorie, pushing her rattling cleaning cart, had no business near the motor pool that day. Yet her schedule brought her there anyway. She moved with steady rhythm, emptying overflowing trash cans, sweeping up discarded wrappers, and wiping down benches. The roar of the Humvees barely made her flinch. She had grown accustomed to noise that rattled others. As she worked, she passed a group of recruits waiting for their turn at the drill. They slouched under the shade of a makeshift canopy, drinking from canteens and wiping sweat from their foreheads. Their energy was low, but their tongues were still sharp. "Look at her," one recruit muttered, nodding toward Marjorie. "Dragging that mop like it's a rifle." Another laughed, spitting dust from his mouth. "She couldn't even carry my gear across this lot, let alone a weapon." "Man, my little sister could outlift her," a third chimed in. They laughed louder, careless with their words. Exhaustion often made cruelty sharper. It was easier to laugh at someone else than face their own weakness. Marjorie didn't look at them. Her face remained calm, her pace unchanged. Yet her ears caught every word. She bent down, picked up a discarded soda can, and dropped it in her bag. The smallest twitch of her jaw betrayed what she thought, but no one noticed. The convoy drill escalated. Humvees practiced tight turns, sudden halts, and reverse maneuvers. Sergeants barked over the engines, their words half lost in the chaos. Dust clouds billowed with every tire spin, stinging the eyes of recruits standing nearby. One young recruit named Tanner, still green and jittery, stumbled in the chaos. He had been struggling all week, slower than his peers, constantly drawing the ire of drill sergeants. Today, nerves and exhaustion made his legs clumsy. As a Humvee reversed under the direction of a sergeant, Tanner tripped over loose gravel, falling directly into its path. "Stop! Stop!" voices screamed. But the driver, blinded by dust and distracted by shouted commands, didn't react fast enough. The vehicle lurched backward, and Tanner's leg disappeared under the crushing weight of the steel beast. A scream tore from his throat, a raw animal sound that froze everyone nearby. For a heartbeat, chaos held the field in silence. Then panic erupted. Soldiers rushed forward, clawing at the side of the Humvee, shouting orders, calling for medics. Tanner's face twisted in agony, his hands beating weakly against the dirt. Blood seeped into the ground beneath him, dark and shocking against the pale dust. "Lift it!" Someone shouted. "Get him out!" Dozens of recruits threw themselves at the vehicle. Their hands gripped hot steel, their boots dug into the dirt as they heaved with every ounce of strength. Muscles trembled, veins bulged, but the Humvee barely shifted. Its massive frame might as well have been anchored to the earth. Harder. Push harder. A drill sergeant screamed, his own face contorted with desperation as he shoved against the metal. But even trained soldiers couldn't move the monstrous weight. The recruit's cries weakened, his breath shallow and broken. Time was slipping. Away. Marjorie had stopped sweeping. She stood a few yards away, her eyes locked on the scene. Her mop leaned against the cart, forgotten. For the first time in years, the quiet mask she wore cracked, revealing the steel beneath. Her gaze swept over the recruits, panicked and powerless. She saw their frantic effort, their fear, their failure. And then her eyes fell on Tanner, pinned and pale, life draining by the second. Something ancient stirred in her chest, the instincts of another life, a life she had locked away. She stepped forward. "Move aside," she commanded. Her voice cut through the frenzy, sharp and steady. For a moment, no one reacted. A cleaning lady giving orders was absurd in the chaos. But there was something in her tone, something commanding, that made even the drill sergeants falter. The recruits glanced at one another in disbelief. "What is she doing?" One muttered, "Lady, get back." A sergeant barked, but Marjorie ignored him. She strode to the Humvee's side, crouching low, examining the angle of Tanner's trapped leg. Her hands brushed the axle, feeling the grit of steel and dirt. She positioned her feet carefully, like a soldier setting a stance. "Step back," she said again, louder this time. Without fully realizing why, they obeyed. Marjorie placed both hands firmly beneath the steel frame. She inhaled deeply, her muscles coiling, her jaw tightening. In her mind, she was no longer a cleaner. She was back in the field, adrenaline surging, body responding to crisis without hesitation. Then she roared a sound raw and primal, and pulled. The impossible began. The front corner of the Humvee shifted, lifting off the dirt. Gasps exploded from the crowd. Wide eyes locked onto the scene as the frail woman they mocked bent steel and gravity to her will. Veins stood out on her neck and arms as sweat streamed down her face. Her entire body shook with effort, but the vehicle rose higher, inch by inch. "Pull him," she growled through clenched teeth. Soldiers didn't hesitate. 2 recruits lunged forward, grabbing Tanner under the arms, dragging him clear of the crushing weight. His cries turned into desperate gasps as they pulled him free. "He's out!" Someone shouted. The moment the words hit her ears, Marjorie released her grip. The Humvee crashed back to the ground with a bone-rattling thud. Dust exploded upward, covering her in a cloud. She staggered slightly, chest heaving, arms trembling from the exertion. For a second, silence blanketed the field. No one spoke. No one laughed. Every eye was locked on Marjorie. She straightened slowly, brushing dirt from her palms. Her breathing steadied, though her face remained flushed. With calm precision, she picked up her mop, slung the trash bag over her shoulder, and turned back toward her cart. The medics swarmed Tanner, lifting him onto a stretcher, their voices urgent but controlled. He was alive barely, but alive. Recruits who had mocked Marjorie moments before now stared at her like she was a ghost. Their minds raced, struggling to reconcile what they had just seen with the image of the woman who scrubbed their floors. One finally whispered, "She?" She lifted it. Another muttered, "That's not possible." Yet they had seen it. Marjorie said nothing. She gave no explanation, offered no boast. She simply resumed her quiet duties as though she had done nothing unusual. But nothing was the same anymore. By nightfall, the barracks buzzed with whispers. Every recruit had their version of the story. Some swore she had lifted the Humvee off the ground completely. Others claimed she had supernatural strength. Rumors spread that she had once been special forces, or maybe part of a secret government program. The truth twisted with every retelling, but one fact never changed. The cleaning lady had saved a recruit when no one else could. Respect replaced laughter. Fear mingled with awe. And though Marjorie carried herself the same as always, sweeping silently, every soldier now stepped aside when she passed. She had shown them who she truly was, if only for a moment. And that moment had changed everything. The moment was burned into every soldier's memory. The crushing scream, the Humvee's weight, and the impossible sight of Marjorie lifting what no group of men could budge. After Tanner was pulled clear, chaos did not fade, it transformed. Recruits swarmed around him, their shouts colliding. Medics arrived with stretchers, their movements brisk and rehearsed. Pressure on that wound. One barked, pressing gauze against the bleeding leg. The air carried the sharp sting of blood. Diesel can sweat, but beneath the frantic noise, silence clung to the edges. The silence came from the soldiers staring at Marjorie. She stood apart, mop in hand, her silver hair damp with sweat. Her arms trembled slightly from the effort she had just unleashed, but her face was composed, her breathing steady. It was as though what she had done required no more than a chore she performed daily. The recruits could not look away. They whispered, their voices hushed, afraid she might hear. She lifted it. No one can do that. I saw it. Don't tell me I didn't. The disbelief rippled through the group like a current. Even the drill sergeants, hardened men who had seen combat and chaos, exchanged uneasy glances. One of them, Sergeant Blake, finally stepped toward her. "What the hell just happened here?" His voice carried more awe than authority. Marjorie met his eyes. For the first time, she seemed taller, her presence expanding beyond her modest frame. "A boy was dying," she said simply. Her voice carried no pride, no explanation. Just fact. Blake opened his mouth, but words failed him. He had commanded men in firefights, had seen extraordinary acts of courage, but nothing prepared him for the sight of a cleaning lady lifting a Humvee. Tanner, pale and trembling, was carried away on the stretcher. His breaths came shallow, his face etched with pain, but his eyes clung to Marjorie. In them was not fear, but gratitude. He tried to speak, but the medics silenced him gently. "Save your strength, soldier." The convoy yard slowly emptied. The engines of the Humvees went silent, the dust settled, and recruits stood scattered in stunned silence. Their drills were forgotten. Training was abandoned. Something greater had replaced it, and in the middle of it all, Marjorie picked up her cart and began to push it again. The squeak of its wheels was the loudest sound on the field. That evening, the barracks pulsed with whispers. Recruits clustered in groups, voices sharp with excitement and disbelief. She picked it up like it was nothing. No, it wasn't nothing. She struggled, but she did it. That's even crazier. "I heard she used to be special forces." "No way, she's too old." "Old? You saw what she did." "Doesn't matter if she's 60, 70, whatever, she's stronger than all of us put together." Rumors spread faster than fire in dry grass. Each telling grew more elaborate, details stretching into legend. Some swore she had lifted the Humvee completely off the ground. Others whispered that she'd once been part of a classified military program, designed for feats no ordinary human could perform. Yet through all the wild stories, one truth united them. Marjorie was no ordinary woman. In the mess hall, Sergeant Blake cornered her quietly as she wiped down a table. "You need to explain yourself," he muttered, his voice low but tense. Marjorie didn't look up. "There's nothing to explain." Blake's jaw tightened. "That's bull, and you know it. I've seen men try and fail to lift that vehicle. And you come out of nowhere and do it alone? What are you?" Her cloth moved across the table, steady as ever. "I'm the cleaning lady," she said softly. He stared at her, waiting for more. None came. With a frustrated exhale, he left her to her work. But in his gut, the unease remained. Not all recruits mocked her anymore. Some still did, nervously, trying to laugh away their fear. But most watched her differently now. When she passed, conversations quieted, doors were held open. Trash was handed to her instead of tossed aside carelessly. Respect uneasy, almost reverent, followed her everywhere. And for the first time, they began to wonder about her past. One night, a recruit named Hayes whispered to his bunkmate, "What if she was one of those black ops types? The kind they don't write about." His bunkmate scoffed, though uneasily. "She's just strong?" "Strong?" Hayes hissed. "You saw her veins, her stance. That wasn't just muscle. It was training. Like she knew exactly how to do it." The thought spread through the barracks. Whispers about her past became as constant as the hum of the lights overhead. Marjorie herself remained unchanged. She continued her rounds, mopping, sweeping, scrubbing, always with quiet precision. She neither confirmed nor denied the rumors. She offered no stories of her past, no proud declarations, but occasionally, in moments when she thought no one was watching, a flicker of something surfaced in her eyes. A memory, a shadow, a ghost of the person she once had been. 1 week after the accident, Tanner returned to the barracks in a wheelchair, his leg bandaged and braced. His fellow recruits cheered his survival, clapping him on the back and welcoming him like a brother. But Tanner's eyes searched the room until they landed on Marjorie. He wheeled himself toward her, the chatter of the barracks fading into the background. "You saved my life," he said, his voice trembling with sincerity. Marjorie paused in her sweeping, looking at him. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she placed a hand gently on his shoulder. "You saved your own," she replied. "I just moved what was in the way." Tanner swallowed hard. "No one believes me when I tell them what you did." "They don't need to," she said quietly. "You know, that's enough." But Tanner couldn't keep the story to himself. Every recruit who listened to him heard the same words. "She lifted a Humvee to save me." And with every telling, Marjorie's legend grew. One evening, under the fluorescent buzz of the barracks, a new recruit laughed too loudly. "Come on, you really think she's some secret war hero? She's just an old lady with a mop." The room went silent. Dozens of eyes turned toward him, their gazes sharp. Even Tanner, pale but resolute, spoke from his bunk. "You weren't there." The recruit's laughter faltered. "Yeah, but..." Tanner's voice cut him off, low and steady. "When that Humvee was on me, I thought I was dead." And then she walked forward. She told everyone to move, and she did it. "Don't you ever disrespect her again?" The weight of his words silenced the room. From then on, no one dared mock her aloud. Still, curiosity gnawed at them. Some recruits dug into old records, trying to uncover her past. Others asked around the base, whispering questions to anyone who might know. But no answers came. Marjorie was a ghost on paper, no history, no background beyond the cleaning job. She held, and she never offered a clue. But in quiet moments, when the barracks were still, and the soldiers lay awake staring at the ceiling, many of them remembered the image burned into their minds. A frail woman gripping steel, her body shaking with effort, her roar echoing across the field as she lifted the impossible dot. It haunted them, inspired them. For some, it was proof that strength came from somewhere deeper than muscle. For others, it was a mystery that gnawed at their pride. But for all of them, it was unforgettable. In the weeks that followed, Fort Benning was never the same. Marjorie continued to mop the floors, scrub the bathrooms, and wheel her cart through the halls. But she was no longer just the cleaning lady. She had become something more, something untouchable, almost mythic. And though she never sought the attention, she could not stop what had begun. The legend of Marjorie had taken root. Dust still lingered in the air from the Humvee's thundering weight, settling into the cracks of boots and the sweat-streaked faces of every recruit who had witnessed the impossible. Tanner had been carried off, alive but broken, and though his cries had faded into the distance, the echo of Marjorie's roar remained, etched in every soldier's chest. Yet no one could reconcile what they had seen. A cleaning lady, a mop, a cart, worn sneakers, and the strength of 50 men in a single pair of arms. The whispers did not die down in the following days. If anything, they grew louder. Drill Sergeant Matthews tried to push the recruits back into routine, barking orders with his usual thunderous tone. "Back to work. I don't care what you saw. Discipline doesn't wait for fairy tales." But even his words felt hollow. Every time the recruits passed Marjorie in the halls, their eyes betrayed them. Fear, awe, and a flicker of reverence lingered in their stares. They lowered their voices now in mocking her, if they mocked at all. And Marjorie noticed. She noticed the way conversations stopped when she entered a room, how recruits stiffened and straightened when she passed. She noticed how some, the boldest among them, tried to catch her eye, hoping for an explanation. But she gave them none. Her silence was her armor. One afternoon, as the sun beat down like a hammer, the recruits were ordered back to the motor pool for another set of drills. This time, the weight of memory hung heavy in the air. The Humvees sat lined in formation, their massive frames casting long shadows. Some recruits stole glances at Marjorie, who was once again working nearby. She scrubbed a bench with deliberate strokes, her movements calm and practiced. The sight unsettled them more than if she had been absent. It felt like fate, waiting to repeat itself. Matthews barked orders, and the drills began. Engines roared. Boots pounded, and soldiers scrambled in tight maneuvers. Dust swirled once again, blinding and choking God then, as though cursed by memory. Another cry split the air. This time, it was Rodriguez, a strong recruit, quick on his feet, unlucky enough to stumble as another Humvee reversed during a simulation. Gasps erupted. The same scene unfolded, panic, shouts, hands clawing at steel. Not again. Someone screamed. The recruits surged forward, desperation burning in their veins. But it was useless. The Humvee wouldn't move. Not an inch. And just like before, Marjorie dropped her mop. She strode into the chaos, her cap pulled low, her expression sharp as steel. "Step back," she ordered, her voice cutting through the roar of engines and frantic cries. This time, no one hesitated. They stepped back. Marjorie crouched low, inspecting the trapped recruit. His leg was pinned at the shin, blood seeping fast. His eyes rolled back in shock. She looked at the terrified soldiers. "When I say lift, you lift him. Do not hesitate. Do you understand?" "Yes, ma'am." Voices thundered automatically, like recruits answering a commander. And in that instant, she was their commander. Her hands gripped the axle again. She planted her feet, her body tense like a drawn bow. The recruits held their breath, waiting for the miracle they now knew was possible. Then she roared. The Humvee shuddered as it rose, inch by inch. The ground seemed to tremble under the strain of her effort. Her muscles strained, veins stood out like cords of rope, her face contorted with raw power. "Now!" She barked. Soldiers leapt forward, dragging Rodriguez free. His scream split the air, but his body was pulled clear. Clear. Someone shouted. Marjorie released the Humvee, letting it crash down with a thunder that rattled teeth. Dust exploded. Outward, covering her arms, her face, her uniform. She staggered, breathing hard, then straightened. The yard was silent. What she had done once might have been dismissed as adrenaline, as a fluke born of panic. But twice, no one could deny it now. Recruits stood frozen, their mouths open, their eyes wide. Even the drill sergeant's men, who had seen death, combat, and impossible odds, were speechless. Rodriguez, groaning in pain, was carried off by medics. But all eyes remained locked on Marjorie. She turned, meeting their stares with calm, steady eyes. Then she spoke. "You think strength is measured by muscle?" Her voice carried across the field, soft yet unshakable. "Strength is what you do when someone's life is on the line. That's all." Her words sank into them like stones into water, ripples spreading through their hearts. And without another word, she picked up her mop and walked away. That night, the barracks buzzed louder than ever. Recruits gathered in circles, voices hushed but urgent. She did it again. You saw her. She ordered us around like she'd been giving commands her whole life. She has been. I swear she has. No civilian talks like that. Rumors deepened. Some claimed she had been Delta Force. Others whispered she'd served in wars, never spoken of publicly. One even suggested she was part of a secret government experiment. But Tanner, pale in his wheelchair, shook his head. You don't get it. She's not just strong. She's disciplined. Did you hear her voice? That wasn't panic. That was training. And in his words, the recruits found what they already suspected. Marjorie had once been one of them. Or perhaps more than them. The shift was undeniable. No longer was she mocked. No longer did laughter follow her. When she entered the room, conversation stopped out of respect, not ridicule. Recruits nodded at her. Some even saluted instinctively. She never acknowledged it. She cleaned as she always had, silent and steady. But within her chest, something stirred. For years, she had buried the soldier she once was. Now, piece by piece, that soldier was resurfacing, not because she wanted it, but because these boys needed it. A week later, Sergeant Matthews approached her outside the barracks. He wasn't the type to mince words. "You've done things, no? One here can explain," he said. "And I don't like mysteries on my base." Marjorie looked at him steadily. "Then stop asking questions you don't want answers to." His jaw clenched. "You're not just a cleaner. Who are you?" Her silence stretched long. Finally, she whispered, "I'm someone who's seen enough death. Don't make me prove it again." Then she walked away, leaving him frozen. The recruits never knew the truth. They didn't know about the missions Marjorie had carried out, the battles she had survived, the comrades she had lost. They didn't know about the medals locked in a dusty box under her bed, or the scars hidden beneath her sleeves. And they never would. All they knew was the image burned into their minds forever. The cleaning lady, silver hair damp with sweat, lifting steel and commanding soldiers as if the years had never passed. To them, she wasn't Marjorie. The cleaner. She was Marjorie the legend. The barracks no longer sounded the same. Where once there had been snickers and offhand jokes about the mop lady, there now lingered a different tone entirely. Whispers carried from bunk to bunk at night, each soldier layering his own version of events onto what they had witnessed with their own eyes. In the retellings, Marjorie's feats became larger than life. Some swore she lifted the Humvee with one arm. Others claimed they had seen sparks under her boots as though the earth itself was helping her. A few even joked nervously that she wasn't human at all, but no one laughed. During drills, the recruits stole glances toward the mess hall, where she often worked. When she walked past with her mop cart, their eyes followed as though she were a general inspecting troops. Even the drill sergeants no longer barked at her presence. Matthews avoided her entirely, and the other instructors gave curt nods instead of orders. Respect had replaced ridicule. Marjorie noticed the change, but pretended not to. She moved with the same steady gait, humming softly as she wiped counters, as though nothing had shifted at all. Yet inside, she felt the weight of their stares. She knew what was happening. The army was building a story out of her, the way it always built legends out of men who had done extraordinary things. But she wasn't supposed to be a legend anymore. One evening, in the dim glow of the barracks lights, Tanner wheeled himself into the center of the room. The chatter hushed immediately. He cleared his throat. "You think you know what she did for me? You don't. I felt it. I felt that Humvee coming off me, and it wasn't adrenaline. That was strength I've never seen before. Strength you can't explain." The men leaned in closer. "She looked at me," Tanner continued, voice low. "And in that moment, I swear she wasn't just saving me. She was commanding the whole field. Us, the medics. Even the damn air stopped moving until she gave the order." Silence followed. Not disbelief-acceptance. The next day, whispers became ritual. "She fought in Iraq, I heard." "No, it was Afghanistan Black Ops, never recorded." "You're both wrong. She was Special Forces, some ghost unit. She's still on the books, just hidden. No one really knew." Every soldier added to the myth, and soon, even the most outrageous claims sounded possible. Because after watching her lift steel and save lives, who could say otherwise? Marjorie, meanwhile, carried on with her duties. She buffed the floors of the admin building, scrubbed grease from the motor pool, sinks, and straightened chairs in the officers' lounge. To an outsider, she was invisible. But to the recruits, every sweep of her mop was a reminder of something greater. When she entered the mess hall, conversation stilled. Men who once mocked her now stood to offer her a place in line, though she never accepted. One even tried to carry her bucket once. She fixed him with a look so sharp he nearly dropped it. "I carry my own," she said simply, and that ended the gesture. But legends are burdens. Late at night, when the base quieted and the stars hung cold above Georgia, Marjorie sat alone in her small room at the end of the staff corridor. On her dresser sat a wooden box, locked with an old brass clasp. Inside lay medals she hadn't touched in years, some for valor, some for service, some for things she never wanted to remember. Her hands hovered over the box. She could hear the boys whispering outside in the dark, telling stories about her. She could hear Tanner's words echoing in her mind. She commanded the whole field. And she hated it, because legends weren't for cleaners. Legends belonged to soldiers. And she wasn't a soldier anymore. Still, the base wouldn't let her fade. 2 weeks after the second rescue, she walked into the gym to mop the locker room floors. What she found stopped her short. Every recruit was there, lined up in formation. Matthews stood at the front, arms crossed. "Recruits requested this," he said gruffly. "They want you to show them." "Show them what?" she asked flatly. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. All eyes were on her. The weight bench was already loaded, 400 pounds in plates, glinting under the fluorescent lights. Impossible for most of the young men, grueling even for the strongest among them. She looked at the bar, then at their eager faces. "No," she said. "I'm not your show." Disappointment rippled through the ranks, but no one dared protest. Marjorie turned, pushing her cart toward the door. Then she stopped. Slowly she turned back. Her eyes swept over them, their wide-eyed hunger. Their need for proof, for inspiration, for something greater than themselves. And against her better judgment, she walked to the bench. The gym fell into a silence, so deep it was almost holy. Marjorie sat, adjusted her grip, and without ceremony, lifted the bar. Her arms moved with steady precision, pressing the weight skyward. Once, twice, 3 times. She set it back with a gentle clink, as though it weighed no more than her mop bucket. The recruits erupted in cheers, fists pounding, voices shaking the rafters. Matthews didn't cheer, but he didn't stop them either. He just watched her. Eyes narrowed. Marjorie stood, brushed chalk from her hands and said, "Don't mistake strength for purpose. Muscles won't save you if your heart isn't ready." Then she left. That night, the whispers turned into chants. Legend, hero, ghost soldier. The story of Marjorie spread beyond the barracks, carried by phone calls home, letters, and casual slips of the tongue. Other companies began to hear. Other drill sergeants muttered her name. Even officers paused when she passed. It wasn't long before the nickname stuck. The Iron Widow. Someone called her once, half in jest, half in awe. It spread like fire. By the week's end, the whole base was using it. Marjorie hated it. But for the recruits, it changed everything. When exhaustion threatened to crush them during long marches, someone would mutter, "What would the Iron Widow do?" And suddenly, boots would lift higher. When fear gnawed at them before weapons drills, they remembered her calm voice. Strength is what you do when someone's life is on the line. She had become more than a story. She was a compass. And though she resisted it, Marjorie realized the truth she could no longer bury. Whether she liked it or not, these boys needed her. Not just her strength, but her presence. Her example. And maybe, just maybe, she needed them too. That night, she unlocked the wooden box. For the first time in years, she touched the metals, running her fingers over the cold metal, remembering the battles, the sacrifices, the faces of those she'd lost. She whispered to the silence, "I didn't want this. But maybe it's not about what I want." The stars outside glittered, silent witnesses to a woman caught between past and present, between anonymity and legend. The cleaning lady had vanished. The Iron Widow had risen. The whispers no longer belonged to just the recruits. Within a month, Marjorie's name had slipped out of Fort Benning, carried in letters to families, murmured during weekend passes, and relayed in phone calls home. By the time it returned, she had become a myth rolling on the lips of men and women who had never laid eyes on her. The Iron Widow. It was no longer a nickname. It was a title wrapped in awe and mystery. And once it escaped into the wider military air, it took on a life of its own. In the Chow Hall, she felt it first. Two captains, men she had never spoken to, stopped eating mid-conversation when she entered. Their eyes lingered too long. One whispered something to the other, and both glanced her way as if trying to decide whether to approach. They didn't, but their silence was louder than any words. Later, in the motor pool, an older sergeant shook her hand firmly. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "what you did out there, that was something." She narrowed her eyes. "What I did was mop floors." The sergeant grinned, unconvinced. "Sure you did?" It spread into the training grounds, too. During rifle drills, recruits muttered, "Steady as the widow," when their hands trembled. During endurance marches, they used her name as a chant, a rhythm to keep their feet pounding the dirt. Even the drill instructors, hardened men who had no use for fairy tales, began using her as an example. "Stop whining," one barked at a winded recruit. "The Iron Widow doesn't whine." The boy straightened at once, eyes blazing with a mixture of fear and pride. Marjorie saw it all. And she hated it, because every time her name was spoken, it chipped at the life she had built in silence. One night, as she emptied mop water into the utility sink, Matthews appeared in the doorway. "They're saying you used to run with Delta," he said bluntly. She didn't answer. "They're saying you pulled men out of Kandahar by the dozen, that you buried a husband in Iraq and kept fighting anyway. That's why they call you Widow." Her hands froze on the mop handle. She turned slowly. "And what do you say, Sergeant?" Matthews studied her face. "I say I've been in this army 20 years, and I've never seen a woman lift a Humvee. So I say, maybe the stories don't go far enough." She exhaled sharply, shoved the mop back into the bucket, and pushed past him without a word. But her chest burned, because buried in his words were shards of truth. Weeks passed, and the stories sharpened into something larger. Other companies requested to borrow her presence during drills, hoping her mere appearance would ignite the same fire in there. Recruits. Once, a lieutenant colonel asked her to join him for lunch. She refused, but the request alone made her uneasy. This wasn't just chatter anymore. It was attention. Dangerous attention. In her small dormitory room, she found herself staring at the wooden box more often. Metals glinted when she cracked it open, the names engraved on the backs whispering to her like ghosts. She thought about the men she'd served with, the operations she'd buried deep, the reasons she had stepped away. She had chosen obscurity for a reason, and now obscurity was slipping from her grasp. The turning point came during a weekend ceremony. Recruits from across Fort Benning gathered on the parade ground, families watching from the bleachers. At the end of the proceedings, a young private broke formation, sprinted toward the bleachers to where Marjorie stood quietly with her mop bucket, and dropped to one knee before her. "My mother wants to meet the Iron Widow," he said breathlessly. Dragging a middle-aged woman forward, the crowd gasped before she could stop it. Hands clapped, voices rose, and suddenly the chant echoed across the field. "Widow! Widow!" Marjorie froze, her mop handle clutched in white knuckles. Her face burned as officers turned, startled, and families whispered. Wide-eyed. She forced a tight smile for the boy's mother, shook her hand, and then slipped away as fast as she could. But inside, she was unraveling. That night, she received an envelope under her door. No return address. No handwriting she recognized. Just her name, Marjorie Hall. Her blood went cold. She opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a single photograph, grainy, faded, but unmistakable. A squad of soldiers in desert fatigues, rifles slung, dust swirling around them. And in the center, her younger self. On the back, scrawled in thick black ink, "We remember." Do they? Marjorie sank onto the bed, the picture shaking in her hand. Whoever had sent it knew exactly what they were doing. Her past was clawing its way. Back. The next days were a blur. She scrubbed, she polished, she carried buckets, but her mind was far from the present. Every whisper of her nickname felt heavier now. Every glance seemed to cut deeper. She wasn't just a story anymore. She was a target, and if her past resurfaced fully, so would the truths she had fought to bury. The missions, the blood, the loss of her husband, the real reason she carried the name Widow, long before these recruits had turned it into myth. One evening, Tanner wheeled himself into the staff corridor where she worked. "You okay, Mom?" he asked softly. She forced a smile. "Fine. You don't look fine." He hesitated and added, "They don't just see you as a story. They see you as hope. Don't let anyone take that from you." She looked at him for a long moment. In his eyes, she saw not awe, but gratitude. Not curiosity, but trust. And for the first time, she realized what terrified her most. It wasn't her past catching her. It was the possibility that she would let these boys down. By the end of the week. The envelope had vanished into her wooden box, buried beneath medals and memories. But the unease lingered. She knew this was only the beginning. Someone out there remembered her real story. And sooner or later, the truth behind the Iron Widow would come to light. For now, though, she kept mopping. She kept walking the halls of Fort Benning with steady steps, carrying both the myth and the burden that came with it. The legend grew. The shadows grew with it. And Marjorie Hale, cleaning lady, ghost soldier, Iron Widow stood on the edge of being discovered. Marjorie woke before dawn, the Georgia sky still heavy with pre-morning darkness. The barracks hummed with faint breathing, the occasional creak of beds, and the soft shuffle of boots on linoleum. She pushed her mop cart down the hall. Its squeak muted under the weight of her thoughts. The envelope had changed everything. Even though she had tucked it safely in her wooden box, she could not shake the image of that photograph, the younger version of herself, standing amid desert dust, rifles slung, the shadows of men and women she had lost clinging to her like ghosts. The words scrawled on the back lingered in her mind. "We remember." Do they? Her chest tightened. Someone remembered. Her. Someone knew the past she had fought to bury. By the time she reached the motor pool, the sun had begun to lift the darkness. Humvees sat lined like sentinels, dust glinting in the morning light. Drill Sergeant Matthews was already there, clipboard in hand, surveying the recruits as they prepped for another round of drills. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "are you sure you're up for this?" "I have work to do," she replied evenly, though her voice carried a hardness she did not try to hide. He studied her for a long moment, reading something in her posture that made him pause. Then he turned away. The day began like any other. Recruits ran laps, lifted rucksacks, and crawled through mud pits. But beneath the ordinary drills, tension simmered. Every glance at Marjorie carried more than curiosity now. It carried a question they could not ask aloud. Who is she really? During lunch, whispers circulated faster than ever. "She's not just strong," one recruit said, slicing into his sandwich. "Did you see her face the other day when Matthews asked her to show us strength? It wasn't pride. It was history. She's been there. I heard she lost someone. another replied. Some husband in a war zone. And why is she still here? Because she's supposed to be invisible, the first said, voice low. But invisible doesn't mean weak. You saw her. That's not normal. That's discipline. That's training no one here has. The conversation died when Marjorie passed. By mop in hand, silent and measured, they didn't dare speak her name not by mid-afternoon. An unexpected visitor arrived at the base. A tall, lean man in a crisp uniform stepped out of a sedan, holding a folder close to his chest. His eyes scanned the motor pool before landing on Marjorie. Something in his gaze made her chest tighten recognition, but not welcome recognition. He approached. Marjorie Howell? Her hands froze on the mop handle. Yes. I've been looking for you, he said smoothly, though his tone carried an edge that set her on alert. The recruits nearby noticed nothing, busy with drills. But for Marjorie, every nerve hummed. She recognized him not personally, but from the past she had buried. The shadows of her missions, of losses, of choices too heavy to name, seemed to materialize in his eyes. What do you want? She asked, steady but cold. He opened the folder, revealing several classified reports, photographs, and documents. It's time we talk about who you really are, he said, and what you left behind. The name Iron Widow didn't exist for him. She was still Marjorie Hall, ex-operator, decorated soldier, survivor of conflicts that were supposed to remain buried. Some of us never forgot, he continued, and we've been watching. You can't hide anymore. Marjorie's jaw clenched. I'm not hiding. I'm living a life you never gave me permission to have. Permission? He countered, voice low, sharp. You ran. You left. You walked away from everything we depended on you for. And now you're teaching children to worship legends while you ignore what's coming. Her fingers tightened around the mop. Memories surged. The desert heat, the burned-out buildings, the men she carried out on stretchers, the friends she never returned home. She had walked away to survive. And now survival seemed impossible. The man didn't wait for a response. He left the folder on the nearest bench, flipped it open, and gestured. You need to see it? These are the missions we recovered, the intel you gathered, the operations you were part of. And someone's asking questions people who should never ask, and they will keep asking until someone answers. Marjorie glanced at the pages. Names, locations, photos, each one those she had buried years ago. Why now? She asked quietly. Because the base knows about the Humvee incident, he said. And rumors are reaching ears that don't care about legends. They want the truth. And when they find it, it won't be pretty. She swallowed, the weight of her past settling like a stone in her stomach. That night, she didn't sleep. Instead, she sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the wooden box of medals, at the envelope, and at the folder left on her desk. She traced the edges of the photographs with trembling fingers. Faces of men and women she had served with stared back at her. Some were smiling, some were dead, some would haunt her forever. And through all of it ran the stark truth, the legend of the Iron Widow was no longer hers to control. She could continue mopping floors and guiding recruits, but whispers were enough to bring the past roaring forward, and the past, she knew, could destroy her. The next morning, the recruits were already lined up for drills. Marjorie entered quietly, mop in hand, but the tension was palpable. They noticed her silence, her steely gaze, and instinctively straightened. Even Matthew seemed cautious. Walking beside her without comment. Tanner wheeled himself up beside her. You okay? He asked softly. Marjorie forced a small smile. I'll be fine. But she wasn't sure she believed it. She swept the floors with a careful, precise rhythm, every motion a distraction from the storm gathering inside her. Later, in the motor pool, the man returned with the folder. He handed it to her, You need to face this, he said. The Iron Widow can't exist in half-truths. You need to decide what to do, and soon. Marjorie opened the folder. Reports detailed operations, enemy contacts, rescue missions. Some she barely remembered clearly. Others etched painfully into her mind. Every report was a reminder of what she had endured, what she had done, and what she had lost. One photo, in particular, froze her blood. It showed her husband, fallen in the desert sand, the light glinting off his uniform, eyes closed. She had buried him in memory, not in stone. Tears stung her eyes, but she blinked them back. You can't run anymore, he said quietly. Not from them, not from yourself, not from what you left behind. By evening, the recruits noticed a change. Marjorie moved differently. Her steps were measured, heavier with purpose, her eyes sharper. Her presence more commanding. Even without words, they could sense it. Something had shifted. Later, Tanner wheeled up to her once more. They're going to ask you questions, he said softly. You're going to have to answer some of them. And if you don't? I know, she said quietly. I know. That night, alone, she made a decision. She could continue hiding, letting the legend of the Iron Widow exist as a myth, or she could face the shadows of her past and reclaim control. Legends were powerful, but truth, she realized, was stronger. Marjorie Halley had survived death, loss, and battles no one could comprehend. She could survive this, and she would. The Iron Widow wasn't just a story for recruits anymore. She was a force tempered by history, trained by war, and ready to confront whatever ghosts approached. The legends were just beginning. The sun rose over Fort Benning like molten gold spilling across the parade grounds. The light caught on the Humvees, their massive steel bodies gleaming, on the boots of the recruits standing in perfect formation, and finally on Marjorie Halley, mock cart pushed aside, eyes sharp, and spine straight. Today was not about drills. It never had been. It was about reckoning. The man who had delivered the folder, the one from her past, stood nearby. This time, he didn't speak. He simply waited, letting the quiet hum of tension fill the air. Every recruit sensed it. Even Sergeant Matthews seemed on edge, an unusual tightness around his jawline betraying concern. Marjorie approached the center of the motor pool. The recruits followed, instinctively maintaining distance, their eyes wide, their breaths caught somewhere between awe and apprehension. She looked at them, silently communicating a warning and a promise simultaneously. Today, she said, her voice carrying over the hum of engines, you will see that strength isn't just physical. It's discipline. It's courage. It's a choice to act when everything inside tells you to run. Her gaze swept over the soldiers like a lighthouse beam. They nodded, some involuntarily shivering at the weight of her presence. Then the obstacle was revealed. A Humvee, stripped of paint in places, engine cold, tires thick with dust, sat in the center of the yard. Beside it, ropes, logs, and weights formed a test unlike anything they had faced before. Marjorie's eyes softened only slightly as she approached the vehicle. Her fingers brushed the steel as if greeting an old friend. Memories surged. Desert dust, the roar of enemy fire, comrades falling around her. This was familiar terrain, but far removed from the sanitized drills of Fort Benning. The recruits watched, holding their collective breath. Step back, she ordered calmly. Watch carefully. Learn more than just the lift. Learn focus. Learn control. Learn what it means to bear weight, physical, emotional, and moral. No one moved. Not a single foot shuffled. She crouched, wrapping her hands around the axle. Her grip tightened. Veins pulsed along forearms hardened by years of conflict, and muscles contracted with a precision only war and survival could teach. Then she lifted Dot. The Humvee rose slowly, deliberately. Dust swirled in a halo around her, and the soldiers held their breath collectively. It wasn't just a lift. It was a performance of controlled strength, a statement of history, a lesson in courage. She rotated the vehicle slightly, adjusting it like a jeweler handling a fragile diamond. Sweat ran down her forehead, but her eyes remained unshakable, focused. "Now," she said softly, "this is what discipline looks like. This is what it feels like when responsibility outweighs fear." She set the vehicle down with care, then straightened. The ground seemed to sigh under the weight she had just held, and the recruits cheered. But Marjorie did not smile. She did not need to. Tanner wheeled forward, eyes wide. "I've never seen anything like that," he said quietly, almost to himself. "You will," Marjorie replied, voice low but carrying authority. "If you pay attention, strength alone is meaningless. Discipline, courage, and conscience, those are what make a soldier, not brute force." The recruits absorbed her words, the lesson etched into their minds more deeply than any drill sergeant could instill. And then came the confrontation she had dreaded. A jeep arrived at the gate, dark, tinted windows concealing the passengers. 4 men in military dress stepped out. One approached Marjorie directly. He held a badge of classified authority and a face familiar from her past. "Marjorie Hall," he said, tone formal. "It's time we discuss your active file." Her chest tightened. "You mean my past?" "Yes, the operations, the deployments, the decisions. People are asking questions. Lives are at stake." She nodded slowly. "Then I will answer them, but not here, not in front of them." She gestured at the recruits, who had frozen, eyes darting between her and the approaching men. "Not now." The man nodded reluctantly. "We'll arrange a private debrief, but we're serious. No more hiding." As they left, Marjorie turned to the recruits. Her voice softened, carrying both authority and compassion. "You saw what I did, but you didn't see everything," she admitted. "You don't need to. What you need is to learn from what you can see. Courage, responsibility, discipline, the strength to act even when you are afraid." The recruits hung on her every word. Some had tears in their eyes. Some fists clenched. All felt a deeper understanding not of Marjorie's past, but of what it meant to be truly strong. "Remember this," she said finally. "Legends are not born from glory. They are forged in the quiet choices we make when no one is looking. You will be tested, and you will fail sometimes. But if you act with courage, discipline, and conscience, you will rise." That night, as she returned to her quarters, Marjorie unlocked the wooden box. The envelope lay atop the metals. She traced the scrawled words again. "We remember." "Do they?" And she smiled faintly, almost imperceptibly. She would answer. She would confront the past fully, because the Iron Widow was no longer just a cleaning lady, no longer just a legend whispered in barracks halls. She was herself whole, unburdened, and ready. Her mop leaned against the wall, almost ceremonial. In its stillness, her medals gleamed under the dim lamp, a reminder of the sacrifices she had endured. For the first time in years, Marjorie felt balance. The next morning, the story spread through the base faster than any rumor. The recruits shared what they had witnessed. The lift, the lesson, the calm authority that radiated from her like a force field. Even the officers began to acknowledge her contributions publicly. Matthews, standing stiffly, simply said, "She's more than anyone could imagine, and we're lucky to have her." The recruits, already transformed by her example, nodded in silent agreement. They no longer viewed her as a cleaner or a legend. They viewed her as a living testament to what courage truly meant. Weeks later, Marjorie met privately with the men from her past. They debriefed her on operations, threats, and intelligence. She answered with precision, demonstrating the same focus she had shown when lifting Humvees. Every answer, every detail, reinforced the truth. She was not simply surviving, she was mastering her past and using it to guide the present dot by the end of the meeting. She returned to her quarters and placed the envelope back in the wooden box. The metals glinted softly under the lamp. The Iron Widow legend was no longer just whispers, it was truth. Backed by history, experience, and undeniable courage. And now she controlled it. Marjorie returned to her routine with a sense of purpose. Unlike any before. She still mopped, still pushed her cart, still scrubbed every corner of the barracks. But the recruits no longer saw her simply as a hero. They saw her as a mentor, a symbol of what discipline, courage, and conscience could produce. When a new recruit asked why she never spoke of her past, she simply smiled. Some lessons, she said softly, are best learned from watching, not from hearing. The rest is history. And the recruits remembered. Always. The Iron Widow had become legend, mentor, and history all in one. A story that would echo in Fort Benning for decades. And for Marjorie, that was enough. The cleaning lady had vanished entirely. What remained was far stronger. The Iron Widow, whole and unstoppable, standing tall over both her past and her present.